I very much would consider it edgy. It was 2016 edginess in all of its glory.
One of the reasons why I wanted to make this video is I've been on YouTube since 2005, and I was very much around in 2016. Back then, I'm telling you, it was a lot. YouTube definitely used to be a significantly more right-leaning platform. And there was this kind of air where if somebody did something indefensible and very, very racist, it was always a joke. It was always satire. And on the flip side, what was happening at the time is there were people like me who were making content criticizing white supremacy. And every time we would say the phrase white people and not say some white people, right? White supremacy, and not make a distinction between a white person and a not racist white person, we would be attacked as though we were utilizing slurs akin to the words that we were being told weren't a big deal to get over, to learn how to take a joke better. Call a white person, they fucking crumble. Call me the N-word, you better get thick skin, you better learn how to take a joke. And that was the attitude.
You shouldn't have to apologize for criticizing someone or something. Voicing your opinion on a subject is a totally natural thing to do. I get criticized, I criticize others, people criticize movies, games, music, all of that.
Back then, we couldn't criticize his usage of racial slurs without being harassed by his audience. I want to make that incredibly clear, because it's not like all criticism was received. There's always this idea that as Black people, we need to just suck it up, get over it, endure, swallow our pride, and take it in stride, right? Like I said in my previous video, slurs are very boring to me. They don't personally offend me. It's not even about me being offended. It's more about, why do you think I need to hear that? If you criticize iDubbbz and you were a person like me, you were likely going to get people throwing slurs at you. And you just had to, once again, deal with it. But before we get into this video, I wanted to let you guys know that it's sponsored by my Patreon members. Patreon is the reason why I'm able to do YouTube full time, and my Patreon members get access to personal vlogs about my personal life and work vlogs about my work life. I really love Patreon, and I'm using it a lot more as I've withdrawn from other social media pages like Twitter, and it's probably the best way to interact with me directly if you're interested in doing that. If you've ever clicked on one of my videos and seen a comment from 2 weeks before the video was posted, it's because I post videos ahead of time on Patreon. So if you want advanced access, Patreon is the best way to do it. Anyway. Hey guys, it's Kat, and I'm back with another commentary video, and this time I'm continuing on a previous conversation that I had about a YouTuber named iDubbbz. Now, if you guys watched that video, you know that I watched his apology for some of his usage of racial slurs in the past. And you know that content cop is not something that really ever appealed to me. I just have enough things to watch that I didn't find the content of a white person who said the N-word to be particularly interesting to me. Not because it's triggering or because it's upsetting, just because there's other more useful ways to spend my time and attention. Now, I bring that up because I want to repeat what I said in the previous video. I'm not somebody who is very tied in on all of the drama between bloggers. I truly don't care. And I actually care a lot less since I've left Twitter. If I get anything wrong, please feel free to correct me. But while you do that, keep in mind that a lot of what I'm trying to talk about in these videos is not really relating to these specific bloggers, even though they are indeed the subject. Really what I want to do is talk about the various themes that are connected to these interactions. And I thought that it would be really important for me, as I had a conversation about his apology, to have a conversation about people's reaction to iDubbbz's apology. So in this video, we're going to be watching Moistcr1tikal's reaction to iDubbbz's apology. And I figured before we get into that, I would give you guys my very brief understanding of Moistcr1tikal. So actually, ever since I got off of Twitter, I have not really been as plugged in to the world as I used to be. And that has led to me gravitating towards people who do more sort of streaming content where they talk about current events. So that's how I found his channel. My experience with him is he's somebody whose videos I click on and watch in the background. Now, Of course, there's going to be conclusions that he makes that I'm not always going to agree with, but I tend to assume that's going to be the case with everyone. I actually find it really strange how people always feel the need to always have themselves in complete agreement with every blogger they follow. Like, I watch his stuff knowing that he comes from a different perspective. And I will say that my general impression of Moist, is that his name? I don't know if that's actually his name. I'm sure he actually has a name. But my general opinion of Moistcr1tikal is just that he seems a little bit sheltered. And I think that from what I can piece together from Moist, I think his name is Charlie. Charlie's his name. From what I've seen of Charlie, it seems like he doesn't really go very far out of his bubble. When I heard that he had not the best take on iDubbbz's, it didn't exactly surprise me because some of his takes in the past have given me that kind of centrist, I'm not gonna pick this side or that side kind of thing. He very clearly avoids certain conversations. So it's clear to me that there's a bit of a conservative slant within his worldview, but I still appreciate some of the stuff that he posts. I'm not somebody who has a parasocial relationship with him. And for me, it's all just like mindless background noise. So anyway, I thought that we would watch this response because to my understanding, he did not think that iDubbbz needed to apologize. But before we do that, girl, I'm gonna pour myself a glass of wine because I know I'm gonna need it. Of course, darling, I only drink the best. Baby, I only drink the best, most fancy, most expensive wine, darling. It's all I do. I don't know why I became British suddenly. Okay, let's see what he has to say.
I am responsible for creating a lot of hurtful and damaging content on this channel. And I've also created a culture of apathy and, I don't know, a lot of like cruelty as well. Some of the videos I've made have been very, not edgy. I don't think some of these videos were edgy. I think they were just outright cruel.
It sucks to hear that this is how he thinks about his old content and his old self. It's always a very difficult realization when you look back on the you of a few years ago disappointed. Like, I used to be 5'6", and I still am, but it sucks to realize that I was then too and have been for a long time. Point is, he wasn't happy with the content he made or the person he was, and now he's trying to apologize for the videos he made. And I, once again, have to completely disagree with the way he looks at it. I feel like his perspective on it is very warped by the way the internet has evolved over the years. The way he talks about this content makes it sound like he used to fucking murder puppies for these videos, which it was never that extreme. I very much would consider it edgy. It was 2016 edginess in all of its glory. That was entirely the brand. And for its time, it lived peacefully. All four nations, water, earth, fire, air, lived together in harmony with all of this edginess going on. Now, obviously, times have changed, and he has changed. He's gotten older. He's in his 30s now. In your 30s, it's not exactly entertaining to just be spamming slurs for shock humor. I don't find that entertaining, and he doesn't either. So it's totally fine to want to distance yourself from making content like that. But I don't think it was a mistake that he made those videos. Like, they're not hurtful, nor do I really think they're damaging.
Okay. Too much to talk about. So one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video is I've been on YouTube since 2005, and I was very much around in 2016. In fact, a lot of you guys might remember me from 2016 because you saw me on anti-feminist YouTube channels. You saw me on anti-SJW YouTube channels. And let me just give you some perspective about what it was like in 2016 to be someone like me on YouTube. As a Black trans woman who was making content about left-leaning issues on YouTube back then, I'm just gonna tell y'all that it was an incredibly hard time to be someone like me on YouTube back then. And I think that a lot of people, because of the recent amount of left-leaning content creators that we have to choose from these days, I think a lot of people have forgotten that used to be the case. YouTube definitely used to be a significantly more right-leaning platform. And what I mean by that is, yes, you had left-leaning creators on the platform, but a lot of the larger channels, a lot of the bigger channels were indeed right-leaning. And there was this kind of air where if somebody did something indefensible and very, very racist, it was always a joke. It was always satire. And for me, as somebody who enjoys comedy and enjoys satire, and especially enjoys edgy humor, it always seemed like lazy comedy done by people who are just looking to shock everyone. And shock humor, look, I went to art school, you guys. Shock humor, shock art, it's got a place, but it's also sometimes the easiest place you can go. And what was frustrating about a lot of this is that whenever you were trying to criticize the people doing this, you always had this response of, you need to learn how to take a joke better. You need to learn how to swallow your offense, stop being so triggered, stop being so easily offended, and just let me be racist on YouTube, right? And that was the attitude, right? That if somebody's doing something loudly racist, if someone's saying slurs, if somebody's doing something that most of us would accept as phobia or ism, instead of reacting to it the way you would, just ignore it, be indifferent to it. And on the flip side, what was happening at the time is there were people like me who were making content criticizing white supremacy. And every time we would say the phrase white people and not say some white people, right? White supremacy and not make a distinction between a white person and a not racist white person, we would be attacked as though we were utilizing slurs akin to the words that we were being told weren't a big deal to get over, to learn how to take a joke better. Call a white person, they fucking crumble. Call me the N-word, you better get thick skin, you better learn how to take a joke. And that was the attitude. And I think that a lot of people might not get that. Let me not act like they don't get this, because frankly, I think they do, but let's act like they don't. I think a lot of people might not get that that creates a very antagonistic space for people of color. And what's interesting too about a lot of these people that have these sort of reactions is that I can tell that the reason why that's not important to them is because they don't actively share space with people of color. In fact, the suggestion that they should may feel like I'm trying to push them into doing something they don't want to do. And look, I'm not going to try to force anyone to engage with a person of color if they don't want to, but it certainly does make it so that you've got some blind spots. It certainly does make it so that you are not always going to understand that while this may be a funny, offensive, edgy thing in this space, it's actually making it so that everyone else feels like maybe I shouldn't be here. And I'm sorry, but part of me belonging in a group and part of me hanging out in a group kind of maybe shouldn't be me tolerating racist slurs, especially when you can't be called a white man without crumbling. To me, the reaction that people have to this, it is very indicative of white supremacy, because there's this sort of very clear idea that I'm supposed to tolerate slurs, but I could never try to specifically use the words that white people themselves have used to define themselves, because that's akin to a slur. Anyway, let's get back into this.
Now, you could make an argument that they were hurtful to the people they were about, like the content cop on Tana or Leafy or any of that. You could say he hurt their feelings or sent harassment their way, which may have been a mental burden on them, and you could feel bad about that. But at the end of the day, I don't think the goal of his content was ever to be hurtful or damaging. He was just trying to entertain and using edginess as shock humor, which for its time was acceptable online. Now,
okay, here's the thing again. So I'm so fascinated by people who say the times were different back then, right? That's so interesting to me. This is a conversation that we had with Shane Dawson. According to Shane Dawson, there was a time where pretending to grope an underage girl was like just acceptable comedy, right? There was a time, apparently, where no one thought that was strange. It's a little frustrating listening to this because there are people who always felt that was wrong. There were always people who felt that iDubbbz's usage of slurs was fucked up. I don't think I ever remember a time where that wasn't a criticism of him. In fact, I only probably knew of him because of his usage of slurs. The difference is that there was a larger group of people who didn't give a fuck. And frankly, I think this is an important part of the conversation too. To my understanding, iDubbbz has a bit of a younger audience, and I do think that maybe one of the aspects of this conversation is that his content often was relevant to younger people, and those younger people probably got a little bit older and matured in a very similar way to iDubbbz, right? And so I don't know if it was so much of a different time as much as maybe you didn't feel as deeply about this back then, right? Maybe you didn't think that slurs were a really huge deal back then, but they've always been a very huge deal. There may have been a lot of people doing it, but that's more indicative of these isms being far more normalized on the internet, not things were so different back then and it was acceptable, because it never was. It never was. I understand how your personal sensibilities can change, but I don't think there's ever been a point that I've ever been alive where a white person saying the N-word has not been criticized. Like I said, I think Charlie is a bit sheltered. That's the impression I get from some of what he says.
Now, whether or not you think that's okay that it was ever acceptable, that's a different argument for a different day. But the point is, the point of his content wasn't to be hateful or hurtful. He really was just trying to entertain. At least that's how I and the majority of people viewed it. So I just don't think that the apology is really warranted. You can explain, I just don't like making that content anymore, so I won't. And be like, hey, I even regret making that content because it's cringe now. That's all fine. But to think that it is this huge, massive problem, like you made an unforgivable mistake, is a little weird to me.
Obviously, for Charlie, it's not that big of a deal. He's not somebody who's ever going to be attacked by those slurs, right? He's not somebody who's ever going to really deal with the way that those slurs have been used to dehumanize. And I want to talk about that too. I think a lot of people don't get dehumanization in this conversation, right? Words like that are usually used in order to justify why somebody doesn't deserve rights. That's usually the function of the term. You're not a person, you're not a human being that's deserving of all the rights and freedoms that I have. You're a this, you're a, and that's why they're used. I feel that the strangest thing in this conversation is these slurs are like abstracted from their original meaning. Hearing him talk about this, in fact, I feel like for a lot of people, the N-word is this forbidden word. They almost extract it away from its racist history. For them, it's just a no-no word that they've been told they can't say. And it's a lot more than that, obviously. The N-word is indeed a lot more than that.
I have no doubt there really were some dangerous weirdos that did hold dangerous beliefs in his community, but I don't think he made them. I think they were there when they found his content to begin with, and they stuck around because they just liked hearing the edgy words spoken out loud. That's it. I don't think he made them. He wasn't the Frankenstein to their monster. Now, I don't want to just keep dissecting every single piece of the video.
It's not even about him making them. It's not even about that. It's about him providing a space for them. Like I said, these kids walked up to him and said the N-word. And they walked up to him saying the N-word, expecting for him to be okay. Aw, Pepper came back. Look at her get the water. They walked up to him expecting that he would be okay with the N-word. So like, obviously they felt safe around him. And I think that the thing that's so weird to me about is it intentional racism or is it just being said for shock humor, is that you're still fostering this environment where racial slurs are being used, right? You're still fostering this environment where it's okay to be racist, right? Again, I totally accept that there's white people who view the N-word as not really a word about dehumanizing Black people, but isn't that such an example of just the degree in which it's been used, right? Like the fact that you're even able to see it as a word that isn't really about dehumanizing Black people, I think really shows you just how successful it's been at dehumanizing Black people, right? That it's no longer about that it supersedes that. Now it's just a word synonymous with shock. I know that there's this insinuation that like extracting the word from racism is going to make it less racist, but for it to become so synonymous with the most shocking and upsetting thing for you to say, for that to also be the word used to dehumanize Black folks is actually quite an indictment of the phrase. Anyway.
I have made some cruel, hurtful content, and I need to acknowledge that, and I'm really sorry that it's taken me this long to acknowledge it. The content I'm talking about specifically are content cop videos and videos where I was just generally criticizing people for very lackluster reasons and obviously didn't have any accountability online whatsoever on my end.
You shouldn't have to apologize for criticizing someone or something. Voicing your opinion on a subject is a totally natural thing to do. I get criticized, I criticize others, people criticize movies, games, music, all of that. And to try and vilify the idea of criticism being evil, I think is a little dangerous because then you just create these echo chambers and no one ever really grows from that. I think it's...
Oh my God. See, now this is another thing that annoys me about. This was not criticism. Like, okay, iDubbbz, and I said this in my video, had a point when he was trying to point out Tana's hypocrisy, right? Tana is somebody, I don't know, who uses the N-word, who was loudly criticizing iDubbbz's usage of the N-word. That is an incredibly valid criticism. She was being a hypocrite, right? But driving to her event, standing in line, holding her hand, holding on to her and saying, say, insert the N-word, and filming it on camera to embarrass her, that's not criticism. And I made a point in my last video about your responsibility to your audience as a YouTuber. I think when you're young and you're immature, it's very easy for you to say, I'm not responsible for anyone. And in a lot of ways, I tend to agree with that. You can't be responsible for every single person in your audience, right? That is, I think, a truthful statement. However, you can make it very clear that you would not appreciate that. And what iDubbbz had recognized was that people had felt from his actions that it was appropriate for them to walk up to people and say racial slurs. And I understand how he might not have understood that, but that's exactly what he modeled. iDubbbz grew up and recognized that he needed to come out and be incredibly clear about how he feels now so that people who would think that he would be in total celebration of them walking up to people and saying racial slurs knew for sure that he was not, right? Anyway.
I think it's totally fine if you regret the way you criticize things, the way you approach the subjects. If you regret how you handled it, that's okay. However, I wouldn't necessarily say that you were picking apart people for lackluster things. You seem to really look back negatively on all of the content cops, but whether you like it or not, you did make good points and good arguments against people who did deserve criticism. I feel like the main pain point of those videos he used to make is the slurs in them. Like his catchphrase was 2 slurs strung together, right? That's not exactly something to be super proud of. I get that. But to go back and say like all of it's shit, all of it's bad and cruel, I think is going way overboard because it's not. I don't think any of it was cruel. I don't think the criticism was
I just think it's so fascinating. And please correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong here, please tell me. But Charlie does not embody any of the groups of people whose slurs were used in his videos. None of the slurs that he used in his videos were slurs that Charlie would have had thrown at him. I could be wrong, but I think if you were that person, you'd feel a bit differently about it. Now, like I said in my previous video, slurs are very boring to me. They don't personally offend me. It's not even about me being offended. It's more about why do you think I need to hear that? You know, calling me the N-word doesn't really offend me, but how you insist on me listening to you say the N-word, that does tend to be at bare minimum disrespectful. And that's not really about anything more than you trying to make my time unpleasant deliberately. That's really what it is more than anything. Charlie's not a person who was on the receiving end of any of these slurs. So I don't know why he feels so comfortable being like, it wasn't that big of a deal, because to a lot of people it was. To a lot of people it was.
Unwarranted, but it's fine to just regret the way you handled it to a certain extent without saying all the content was damaging or cruel or bad.
I was morally grandstanding and acting as if I am any better than any of these people that I was making content cop videos on. And I'm not. I'm a human. I'm a real human who makes mistakes. And I make a different set of mistakes than the people I was making videos on, but it doesn't matter. I don't think anyone deserves that level of cruelty or hate. It's also indoctrinated a lot of people into thinking that this is an okay way to behave, and it's not.
I feel like there's a chance he may have been hit by a Men in Black neuralizer and had his memories rewritten of what that content actually was, because I never got the impression from those videos that he was morally grandstanding or that he was trying to pitch himself as superior to them morally. He never really tried to make himself seem like he was better than them. In fact, he would multiple times point out like his problems as well, and even give them advice on how they could have attacked him better in response, giving them ammo if they wanted to use against him. It all seemed very self-aware, not from a moral grandstanding perspective, but just you were lending criticism in a goofy way to entertain your audience as well as provide legitimate points for why these people are doing bad things or have...
Okay, so I'm going to pause right here because there's a part of me... I'm going to be very honest with you guys. The amount of content that I've watched with you guys of iDubbbz is the amount of content of iDubbbz I'm going to watch. But for my own understanding, like I said, when I watched one of his content cop videos, I did leave feeling like I expected it to be a bit more gratuitous. Like I expected it to be really bad. Now, somebody commented and told me that the video that I showed called The N-Word Explained was actually part of the Tana Content Cop video that he had edited out, which makes so much sense because I felt that video was strange, right? So I don't know if maybe some of the content that I have seen has just been edited in a way where some of the more gratuitous stuff just isn't there anymore. But I'm going to just accept that from what I've heard that it used to be pretty fucking gratuitous. And I think it's strange to me that Charlie is taking such an issue with him apologizing and feeling a certain way about it, right? Look, like I'm incredibly hard on myself. I'm an incredibly critical creator. And so there's a lot of stuff that I look back on and I have deep regret about. And I'm like, oh my God, why did I upload that? But those things aren't usually videos where people are saying racial slurs. I don't think that it's really his place to say that he doesn't need to apologize for the use of racial slurs. I don't know. To me, that doesn't really seem like it's his place because of the things to apologize for. I think it's one of the more valid reasons to apologize. And not only that, there are plenty of people who commented on my video and commented on his video that will attest to the fact that, yeah, iDubbbz definitely did pull a lot of people in a certain direction. Anyway.
I was being very bigoted in a lot of my videos, and I justified it because I didn't think it was too serious. And I thought that people were going to see that I had good intentions, but that's so silly. Casual racism is still racist. Casual bigotry is still bigotry. And I said a lot of things that I look back at and I cringe now, and I'm like, that is an awful thing to say.
This I completely understand. That is totally normal to look back on that and cringe, right? In your 30s and really any age over 16, you're not exactly going to be getting a hearty whole belly laugh just hearing a bunch of slurs being spammed. Real life isn't Call of Duty lobbies. I don't think many people in the real world are going to be like laughing and fist pumping hearing you just shout slurs as comedy. So that makes sense to look back on that and cringe. However, none of your videos came from a place of hate. At least I don't think so. I don't think you were ever a racist or a bigot or anything like that. You used those words for shock humor. That was the whole goal, the edgy shock humor of using those words. And you made it pretty clear that was your drive. And he does mention it in this video with the it's either all okay or none of it's okay mentality. But I really think most people were able to recognize that the things he was saying weren't coming from a place of legitimate hate. Now, you can, of course...
This is another one of those topics. So the intent thing, like I didn't intend to be racist. I just said the racist thing because it was shocking. I didn't intend to be sexist. I just said the sexist thing because it was shocking. Now, like I said, in a lot of these conversations, I have to separate parts of my brain because I like offensive comedy. I do like edgy comedy, but I also have to think about it like this, right? What was my experience with iDubbbz, right? I don't care what the context of it was. he was a white dude saying the N-word regularly and advocating for the usage of racial slurs and other slurs, I didn't need to engage with that content. It didn't really matter that he was just saying it to shock me. I didn't want to engage with it. And here's the thing that really drives me crazy about a lot of this shit, right? Why should I stick around to find out whether or not he actually means it or not? Why? Like, seriously, why? Why? And why is it unfair and unreasonable for me to say, hey, this white dude saying the N-word probably is a racist? Why? There's this thing that a lot of white folks do where they're going to say something really racist in public, but then they're going to say, but I didn't actually mean it in a racist way. And then I'm supposed to sit there and listen to the reason why and actually accept that the reason isn't racist when the punchline is racism. I understand that to a lot of white people, the N-word is just a word and they're saying it because it's shocking and they've been told not to say it. I get that that's the appeal. And I get that when that's your way of looking at it, you may not think of it as racism, right? But what you're actually doing is expressing racism for shock. Therefore, you're expressing racism. I don't understand why it's that complicated to some people. I really don't get it. Why is it that complicated? It's not unfair to assume that a person who uses slurs with no shame probably is a bigot. And I find it so fascinating that people expect for us to suspend this disbelief of white men that somehow if they say the N-word, we have to make sure that they mean it in a not racist way. And again, this is hard for me to listen to as a Black creator, because what was my experience in 2016? That people would just lie about things that I said and believed in, that people would just fabricate like complete lies about how I felt about things. Despite me cataloging the vast majority of my thoughts, they would misrepresent what I said in order to paint a certain picture. And when I say that, I really do mean that they would do that. I don't mean that they would just like misinterpret something I said. They would lie. And whatever they lied about would become the truth. It's so hard for me to have that experience in 2016 and then listen to somebody say, we need to investigate and interrogate whether or not this white man means this racial slur in a racist way. I don't love the pressure that I've felt from people to overtly celebrate the fact that iDubbbz apologized. What I appreciated about iDubbbz's apology is that he didn't do the thing a lot of other people try to do, where they're trying to really distance themselves from the person who said those things. Instead of saying, I was in a dark place, I was a different person, he actually just came and said, no, that was me. I said those things and they were wrong. And that's something that I really appreciated about his apology. At the same time, I've seen a lot of bloggers make this apology. I've seen a lot of bloggers do their, I said the N-word way back in the day, I'm going to apologize, mea culpa in public for it. And if I'm being frank with you, as a Black creator who has dealt with a ton of harassment on this platform, ever since I've been on this platform, sometimes those conversations are hard to watch because the amount of grace extended towards white creators is pretty great. Watching back iDubbbz's video with Tana, I was shocked that Tana told iDubbbz to kill himself. It was interesting to see that Tana was able to say something like that to iDubbbz and then get a show on MTV. It's very bizarre because my experience as a Black creator is I've had to be incredibly careful with what I say, how I present it, because if I don't say or present things a certain way, I'm likely to be harassed. And if you follow me for a while, you know that I've spent a lot of time trying to put myself together in a certain way to circumvent those kinds of reactions. And if you're joining me right now in the timeline, you are definitely meeting a version of me who does not give a fuck about that. Because as a Black creator, I have often felt like it doesn't even matter what I say. It doesn't even matter how I say it. It's the fact that I'm visible and can be used as an avatar. That is enough for people to say, oh, actually, she really feels like this. We're supposed to listen to iDubbbz say racial slurs for shock humor and somehow not assume that the intent is racism. That requires such a suspense of disbelief. And it's just a great example of how we're expected to give white men the benefit of the doubt. Anyway, let's get back into it.
Of course, still say that it's unacceptable that he was using slurs for shock humor and punchlines in his videos for the jokes. That's a totally fair perspective to have. But it's still, I think, a little ridiculous to make it seem like it was this big of a deal that it warranted a whole apology video in which he makes it seem like he'll never truly find.
It's so weird listening to a white man tell another white man that he didn't have to apologize for using racial slurs. It's bizarre because, like, why do you feel so comfortable? Let's talk about this. Why do you feel so comfortable doing that? Why? You're not the person impacted by this. Why do you feel so comfortable doing that? And here's the thing, like, white people like this are going to seek out the Black person who says, I wasn't really offended, right? They're going to seek that out so they can say, oh, those Black people who were offended, they were overly sensitive and easily offended, right? To me, this is so simple. He said a racial slur. We tend to assume the racial slur is offensive. The only reason it's shocking is because it's racist. Why is it a bad thing for a white man to apologize for racism? Like, even if he didn't mean it, why is it a bad thing for him to apologize for racism? It's funny, watching this video, I'm thinking like, so I don't really understand why he sat down to make this video. Seriously, like, it's just so strange. I would feel so bizarre making a similar video that I don't really get why he feels so comfortable making it.
Find forgiveness, and he'll never forgive himself for it, for saying the slurs in the videos and making the content he did. Because again, like, he's talking about it like he's a fucking reformed racist, like he was actually a racist, and when I don't think that was the case. He was an edgelord. And
oh my God. Okay, yeah. Again, with the fucking nuance, right? He wasn't a racist. He was an edgelord. The frustrating part about this is not even the word. It's that, okay, he's an edgelord. He's an edgelord and his jokes are funny. So I'm supposed to be okay with him saying the N-word. I'm supposed to be okay with him saying racial slurs. I'm supposed to tolerate that. And again, if you say anything critical of white people, if you say anything critical of men, worse, if you say anything critical specifically about white men, hell, throw in a cis on top of that. If you say anything critical of cis white men and you just say those words, these people will react as though you are calling for genocide, that you're being the racist actually. But this guy gets to just say racial slurs for shock, and we're supposed to just act like that's not a huge deal. That's not actually racism. It's so bizarre to listen to. It is really, really bizarre to listen to.
I feel like this whole video could have just been summed up very easily. Hey guys, it was fucking 2016. I was edgy, and now I think it's cringy, so I don't want to do that anymore, and we're closing the book. That we're shutting that chapter down, putting the kibosh on it. Now we're doing some other stuff. And that would have been a totally fine explanation. A lot of people would have still would have been disappointed, of course, in his audience that liked that content. But at the end of the day, you shouldn't feel like a prisoner to your audience. You should make what makes you happy.
Okay. What is so wrong with him calling it racist? Why? I find, let's really unpack this. So I understand to some degree why someone like Charlie is confused, because his understanding of racism is that it's intentional, right? Racism is this intentional act that you do deliberately because your goal is to dehumanize a person of color, right? What a lot of people don't get is that we live in a world that has history. And one of the points I tried to make in the previous video is that our history has made it so that certain isms are normalized, right? And the idea that Black people are inherently inferior has indeed been normalized. I remember when I used to have debates with people about the N-word when I was living in my little conservative town. And one of the common conversations that I would get into is that the N-word is not a slur against Black people. Oh no, it simply means ignorant. I remember I would get into so many of these conversations with people about this so many different times. And it was always like, we are only going to use this word to refer to ignorant people. And if you respond or react to this, or you're just saying that you're ignorant, right? There's always this idea that as Black people, we need to just suck it up, get over it, endure, swallow our pride, and take it in stride, right? And I find that to be really frustrating because that sort of mentality does indeed ignore that racism is a tangible, real, and impactful thing. And I think that people like Charlie think that because they're not wearing white hoods or something and saying the N-word, then somehow it's not racist, or it's not intentionally racist, or it's not deliberately, meanfully racist. But the thing about it is, if we didn't live in a country that had a history of anti-Blackness, that would not be a word that you would reach for, right? The word that you're using is only shocking because of its history, right? It wouldn't be shocking if racism was not a thing. You really can't extract that word from its history. I understand why you may want to, but that doesn't actually mean you're going to be able to. I can see how a white person who doesn't think that they're racist may think that them using the N-word is not a violent expression of racism. But because of its history, it is. And so it doesn't actually matter if he didn't intend for it to be racist or he didn't mean for it to be racist. It was racist. And the thing I appreciated about his apology is that he says it like that. He plainly names it as racist and decides to move forward and say, I'm trying to work through this. I'm trying to make amends. And I'm not somebody who needs that. I'm not somebody who needs to see somebody do that. And frankly, I don't really believe in applauding these people for having their N-word redemption moment. But I think that if there were a way of showing that you're willing to actually acknowledge what you've done in a full way, it would be in the words that he used. He did this. This was him. He said this. It was racist. The denial that people have where they say it's not racist, you're really doing a bit of mental gymnastics here. You've got to really try to fight to find that way where him saying the N-word isn't racist. It is. It has always been. Anyway.
Don't think you should have felt obligated to make this video. Like, I don't think this situation was so damaging that it warranted this kind of like fucking presidential press conference here over it and apologizing for the content you made back then. I don't think like you ruined lives because you made Content Cop. I don't think you made an entire generation of racists and bigots because you use slurs for shock humor.
Okay, I mentioned this in my previous video, but I don't have the full cultural reference point for iDubbbz. But I did read quite a few comments from people that said they went to school with people who watched iDubbbz's content, and they had to endure racial slurs because these kids who watched his content felt emboldened to say them. And again, you can say that's not your responsibility. You're not responsible for your audience, yada, blah, blah, blah. But he did indeed normalize the idea that if you were a cool person who didn't give a fuck, you would say shit like that. And so I think if that's something he wants to apologize for, he should apologize for.
I think that's a very bastardized perspective of how people digest content online. Now, I have no doubt that his audience did cultivate some weirdo losers that probably were real racists somewhere in there that didn't really care about his message and just liked that he was saying the N-word. I have no doubt that existed in his community. But I don't think that was his goal, and there's always going to be weirdo losers. Of course, you can do your best to mitigate those people from feeling welcome in your community, but that all starts with just changing the content over time. Again, that's not a weak thing to do.
But the thing about it is that that's what he did, right? The reason he made this video is because he had already started to pivot and been pivoting for a really long time. But even after all of those years, he still had people walking up to him and thinking that he was going to be cool with them saying racial slurs. So he felt like he had to make that video. He felt like he had to make it clear that this is not how he feels. PewDiePie had a similar issue where he did a bunch of Nazi shit. Let's just say that, because that's what it is, quite literally. And a lot of people's criticism was he should just come forward and criticize the Nazis. Now, I understand why some people may think that's stupid, because you think the idea that, PewDiePie having Nazis and supporting Nazism is so far-fetched, right? But I'm gonna be honest with you. To me, it's very suspicious and strange that he hasn't condemned that, right? Because frankly, it's easy to do that, right? If you're a person who's so against that sort of shit, it's so easy to condemn that sort of shit, right? In fact, bloggers regularly come out and condemn segments of their audience who have beliefs that are damaging, that they don't agree with. And because sometimes the audience does think that, hey, this person agrees with me. Of course, there were racists who clicked on iDubbbz's videos and said, hey, this guy's on our side. This guy was arguing for the idea that these slurs that were used to dehumanize people, and we know that they are, and they know that they've effectively done that, actually aren't that impactful, actually aren't worth criticizing. So of course, racists heard that and said, hey, this dude is helping spread our message. And again, I understand how iDubbbz may have thought that he wasn't doing that, but it's what happened. And once again, I think if he wants to apologize for that, he's got a really good reason to apologize for doing that.
To do that is not a weak or passive approach. The vilifying of your own audience and your previous content, I don't think is the right way of even looking at the content you used to make or the audience that you had.
Why?
Actors in there, but not everyone was. And to make them feel like they were, if they like.
See, that's also, now you're taking it so far, right? Like, I didn't get the impression that iDubbbz was criticizing his entire audience. I got the impression that he was criticizing those particular people in his audience. And what I can piece together, y'all will have to let me know if this is wrong. A lot of people really appreciated this apology. There are people who liked iDubbbz, but couldn't overlook his previous racist shit, who now appreciate him more for solidly coming out against the shit that he used to say. That's the thing. I'm turned off by PewDiePie forever because of that Nazi shit. And you can argue with me about, oh, he didn't mean it like that, it was just a joke or whatever. But for me, it's like, you said that Nazi shit, I'm good. Him saying, hey, that was fucked up, that was wrong, I shouldn't have done that, and if you're a Nazi, get the fuck out of my audience, would do a lot to make me think, at bare minimum, that he actually isn't a Nazi. It's the fact that he keeps so silent about it that makes me more suspicious that he is, right? And frankly, I'm frustrated with Charlie because to me, it's very obvious that he's trying to argue against a specific segment of his audience. And I think he's not really necessarily, put it this way, you're not really complimenting iDubbbz by saying that the vast majority of his audience appreciated his racism. It's insulting, frankly.
Like, you weren't a bad person if you were laughing at his content cops or anything like that. And I don't think he was a bad...
You know what? Here's another thing to talk about. People that I've seen that have had a really negative reaction to iDubbbz's apology feel to me like people who feel really fucking called out by the apology. And this is something that sometimes happens with YouTubers, right? When YouTubers change, when they shift, when they move on, when they mature past a certain point, there are inevitably going to be people who feel left behind. And once those people start doing better, it's sometimes hard for the people who were comfortable with that person being where they are to accept that person has moved forward because they can't move forward yet. When I started becoming more secure financially and I started becoming a healthier, more mature person, there were absolutely people who did not like that I'd gotten to a point of security because they identified more with the version of me that was not as secure. There are some people who, when they see you get better, when they see you shift, when they see you change, they feel threatened by that because they feel like they're being told they need to also change. And I think that there's probably part of Charlie who felt that way. Listening to what he's saying, I think he feels called out by iDubbbz's apology. And maybe rightfully so. I don't quite know. But it's strange to me to have this reaction to an apology that somebody else is giving about a slur that doesn't impact you. Anyway.
I know that a lot more needs to be done to even approach a life that I would think would be like acceptable.
You don't deserve to be fucking publicly flogged with tomatoes thrown at you for the rest of your life and skinned alive because you made edgy videos in 2016, man. It's just not that big of a deal. It feels horrible hearing this from him, knowing that it weighs so heavily on his mind that he made these videos, so he feels like he's a real piece of shit for doing it. You just made edgy YouTube videos. You didn't ruin anybody's life. You didn't create a fucking army of racists and bigots. The content itself isn't bigoted content either. You used edgy shock humor. And I don't think that makes you a bigot that you're going to have to atone for those sins for the rest of your life over.
Okay, so here's yet another layer of this conversation. Let me take a sip of this before I talk about it. I talked to you guys about how things were for me in 2016. And I don't really know how to talk about this fully, but because of a lot of the harassment that I've dealt with, I have lost out on several opportunities. And I've had more than a few situations where there was an opportunity that came to me, and because there was some lie that some person fabricated for content, I had that opportunity taken away from me. And I just want to draw attention to that because while that was my experience on YouTube, his experience on YouTube was making millions of dollars saying racial slurs. I had to deal with having a lot of what I've done torn down because I'm a Black trans woman making content. And no, I'm not blaming everything on that, but I do know and I do accept now that as a Black trans woman who makes content, there are going to be people who are a little bit more excited about misrepresenting me than misrepresenting others. And I had to deal with that loss of opportunities because of me trying to make content defending people who live through life the way that I do, sometimes calling out racism, often criticizing sexism, often criticizing anti-feminists and things like that. I had to deal with a loss of opportunity because of some of the harassment that I dealt with. But he was screaming racial slurs and making millions of dollars. I feel like that's an important dissonance to point out because I think the reason he feels so bad about it is because that was the reality, right? If you were a person who tried to criticize iDubbbz back when he was saying all of this shit, you were inevitably attacked. You were inevitably pushed off of the platform. You could not speak out against him and say, you saying racial slurs is fucked up without people dogpiling on you. So I think we really do need to acknowledge that back then, especially, criticism of people like iDubbbz was not well received. If you criticized iDubbbz and you were a person like me, you were likely going to get people throwing slurs at you. And you just had to, once again, deal with it. You just had to deal with the fact that these people were saying racial slurs at you. You just had to accept the fact that people were attacking you because you were criticizing their favorite YouTuber. And back then, I'm telling you, it was a lot. It was a lot. You got a lot of bullshit for doing something like that. And so while that was the reality, right, he got to criticize people by using racial slurs and making millions of dollars doing it. We couldn't criticize his usage of racial slurs without being harassed by his audience. I want to make that incredibly clear because it's not like all criticism was received, right? His version of criticism was yelling racial slurs. And if we ever criticized him for using racial slurs, we were attacked on this platform. And like I said, a lot of people who made that content are no longer on here because of that.
I'm going to match and donate to an organization that would have been particularly affected by the type of rhetoric that I've been spewing on this channel. And again, this isn't the end of what I'm doing. This is just the start.
You'll get no complaints from me here. I'm always on the side of helping people, so anything charitable, I'm always for. Though I don't think it was necessary or anything, I still think that's a nice gesture regardless. But he uses the word rhetoric here. And that again makes it sound like these videos were coming from like a legitimate racist, which I don't think they were. I really don't. At least I don't want to believe that iDubbbz used to be a racist and he was using that to try and...
All right, okay, quickly break this down, okay? Because this is something that it's still getting on my fucking nerves. Let's say there are two white people standing here and here, right? On either of my sides. I'm over here chilling on my phone, doing whatever I'm doing, right? Over here, this dude who's not an intentional racist says, "Nigger," right? And this person over here who is an intentional racist says, "Nigger," right? They're both saying it for shock. They're both saying it to shock someone, right? How the fuck am I going to know the difference between the two? Seriously, how the fuck am I supposed to know the difference between the two? And why do I need to know the difference between the two to say that I don't like that word because it's a racial slur? Like, why is it always up to me to stomach the racial slur? Why? Why? Seriously, why? Why do I have to stomach the racial slur? And why is the racial slur never just racist? You may think that the intentional racist is the only person who deserves to actually apologize or some shit. But if you're saying something that I'm recognizing as racism, why is it not okay for me to say, hey, you're being racist and I don't like that? I really don't get it. I really don't get his thing with this.
It seems like he was really just using these words as shock humor.
Such a stupid point.
Sure.
Such a dumb point. It's a really dumb point.
Fine to point out, but it just, it doesn't strike me as something that was genuinely ruining people's lives hearing that kind of shit. It's just like an eye-rolling thing to look back on now. Ugh, that's fucking lame.
The N-word.
I just don't think it goes too much deeper than that. Like I said,
it's just so crazy to me how comfortable he is saying that. I don't know why you genuinely think you get to determine that it's not a big deal. That is so strange to me. That is so strange. And like I said, I watch his channel. He definitely gets freaked out about things that are a lot less intense.
I have no doubt there really were some dangerous weirdos that did hold dangerous beliefs in his community, but I don't think he made them. I think they were there when they found his content to begin with, and they stuck around because they just liked hearing the edgy words spoken out loud. That's it. I don't think he made them. He wasn't the Frankenstein to their monster. Now, I don't want to just keep dissecting every single piece of the video.
It's not even about him making them. It's not even about that. It's about him providing a space for them. Like I said, these kids walked up to him and said the N-word. And they walked up to him saying the N-word, expecting for him to be okay. Aw, Pepper came back. Look at her get the water. They walked up to him expecting that he would be okay with the N-word. So like, obviously they felt safe around him. And I think that the thing that's so weird to me about is it intentional racism or is it just being said for shock humor, is that you're still fostering this environment where racial slurs are being used, right? You're still fostering this environment where it's okay to be racist, right? Again, I totally accept that there's white people who view the N-word as not really a word about dehumanizing Black people, but isn't that such an example of just the degree in which it's been used, right? Like the fact that you're even able to see it as a word that isn't really about dehumanizing Black people, I think really shows you just how successful it's been at dehumanizing Black people, right? That it's no longer about that it supersedes that. Now it's just a word synonymous with shock. I know that there's this insinuation that like extracting the word from racism is going to make it less racist, but for it to become so synonymous with the most shocking and upsetting thing for you to say, for that to also be the word used to dehumanize Black folks is actually quite an indictment of the phrase. Anyway.
Even though I disagree with iDubbbz's perspective on his older content being damaging or dangerous or indoctrinating, I still do respect that he didn't like what he was doing, so now he's doing something that he likes more. Even though it is coming at the risk of losing his audience, he'll find happiness in the content that he makes going forward, and maybe he's happier with the new audience that he potentially cultivates through all of it. But yeah, anyway, just wanted to talk about this whole situation.
I have a hard time believing that the apology is genuinely going to be a bad thing for him. I don't know if he's lost a bunch of subscribers or something. I don't know if it's going to really ever like negatively impact him, because I think it's a net positive change. He's coming out and saying, I'm not going to be racist, and I don't agree with racism, and I don't like racism. And of course, yeah, there's going to be people in his audience who aren't going to like him for saying that. But I would argue that he probably is going to appreciate the audience that's left behind. Obviously, there are people who don't love the fact that he's changed. And from what I can piece together, the people who don't like that he's changed are still in a very immature place and probably will stay there. And they probably won't get it until they eventually leave their bubbles, have their perspectives shifted, and suddenly get where iDubbbz is coming from. Like I said, iDubbbz's apology doesn't make me a fan of iDubbbz. I don't suddenly think that he is an amazing person, but I think in terms of YouTube apologies, he definitely did probably the best one I've ever seen. And I definitely think that he means it. And it's so strange to me to listen to a white man tell another white man that he doesn't need to apologize for racial slurs. I don't understand why he's so comfortable doing that. I really don't understand why he's so comfortable doing that. In my eyes, he didn't make this decision to satisfy his audience. He did it for himself. And that's personally what I got. Like, I agree that he didn't need to make this video. I agree that it's a video that no one was really asking for, but in a way that kind of makes it great. Imagine what would happen if all of the people who made similar content came forward and said, hey, I said some fucked up racist shit way back in the day. I don't agree with it anymore. I don't identify with it anymore. And I would like to move past. It's easy to just say some stupid racist shit and have people respond to it. It's not very sophisticated. And again, it is so strange listening to people talk about this shit like it is. I find it so bizarre because for me, this kind of comedy, the saying slurs, it is poop humor. It is akin to poop humor. And iDubbbz actually commented on my short where I was making that point, and he agreed with me and said that it is indeed poop humor, because that's what it is. It's really what it boils down to. So it is so bizarre to listen to somebody defend its validity as though it is very good. And I just think, again, the impression that I have is that Charlie is the sort of person who feels called out by the apology. And I think that's why he's having the reaction that he's having. Anyway, I think this is the last time I will talk about the iDubbbz situation. I really don't want to make a habit of talking about these sort of things. If you guys have followed me over the years, you guys have watched me make so many videos about racist YouTubers. And as I close out this particular series of videos, I want to make it really clear that I have no interest in doing that ever again. I'm sure I'll probably come back and there'll probably be something that'll pop up and I'll have thoughts about it. I've made a ton of videos about Jeffree Star and Shane Dawson engaging in racism. And as a Black creator, it is just exhausting. It is exhausting to watch people who have very proudly and loudly engaged in racism be defended, celebrated, and successful. It is hard to watch that, especially knowing that you don't really get the same ability to be strange and say edgy things. I've accepted now that our society is just always going to be so much more accepting of racist white people than it will ever be of me. And I already knew that, but respectability politics can make you feel sometimes if you said things differently, if you dressed up a different way, if you didn't wear strange makeup or something, people would respect what you have to say so much more. But I've realized, and I've observed, especially through situations like this, that I'm never going to be given the same amount of leeway ever. And having these conversations is truly bizarre, because if these people were treated the way that I've been treated or the way that a lot of other Black creators have been treated, the moment they said the N-word, we would never hear about them again. But we are always having these endless conversations about how the racism that white people have expressed, whether they meant it or not, is not that big of a deal, shouldn't really be criticized or removed from the platform because of free speech or whatever. And it is, for me, a bizarro world conversation. It is very frustrating for me as a Black creator to constantly observe these conversations and know that Black creators will never be given the same leeway. So I want to stop talking so much about this stuff, so I probably won't make a video like this anytime soon. But if you're curious about what I'm working on, you can always check out some of the videos that I'm posting on Patreon, which is patreon.com/katblaque. KATBLAQUE, all one word. That's where I make a lot of vlogs. I upload a lot of videos where I am ranting about certain things. If you really want to know a lot of my other feelings about this, I did upload a very long, unedited rant on my Patreon if you're curious. But yeah, that's just the best way to support the stuff that I do. I have a lot of really big projects that are coming. I'm really excited about that stuff. You guys will probably see that stuff on Nebula first, and I'm pretty excited about it. Not going to talk too much about it on here, but again, I talk about it all the time on my Patreon. So anyway, on that note, I will talk to you guys next time. I want you guys to always remember and to never forget that you are beautiful and you are loved. Bye.